This is a virtual reading of Conspirators, To Each His Own Agenda by Matt Gupta. Chapter 2. General Faelthor's Camp, Magna Dacia. The actual battle had only taken a short time, but the rout and subsequent clean-up had lasted nearly a day. The Saracens, dismayed by the death of their powerful king, had surrendered unconditionally to General Faelthor. It was a significant turn of events, as the law of the kingdom demanded that any victory must go to the Marble City, not the victorious general. Faelthor walked slowly, blood-stained, into the Golden King's tent, and collapsed into a low chair under the strained weight of his heavy armour. The tent was made of marble, and set upon several strong wooden beams. It was made as a travelling house, to be raised upon the backs of several hundred slaves. Silk lined the walls, and several slaves still remained, chained to the walls with golden metal. After ordering their release and feeding, Faelthor set up his new command centre in the tent. It was now well into the next morning, and he hadn't taken his armour off, or washed the blood from his face. Imperator, Cimmerian greeted, entering the house with another guard. He was equally blood-stained, and his black cloak had been torn away. "Send word to the Marble City." Faelthor clicked his neck. "The kingdom has won." "Yes, sir," Cimmerian saluted. He shouted to someone outside, and then, upon re-entering, looked around the house. "It's a bit much, don't you think?" "The Golden King certainly likes his reds and purples," Faelthor nodded. He sighed long and hard, looking out into the distance in the direction where the Golden King had run. "This isn't how I wanted this to end." Cimmerian huffed in amusement, then, realizing he wasn't joking, asked, "Are you of sour mind?" Faelthor smirked at him, and then the realization sprung into Cimmerian's eyes. "Indeed." He turned to the old man. "Did you hear that, soldier? The general is disappointed with the fact the enemy has surrendered to him, and not the kingdom." "I did, sir," the guard said, casually, but maintaining the discipline of the military. "We should spread the word." The guard nodded in agreement, saluted, and left. "You have your victory," Cimmerian continued, his tone completely changed. Faelthor raised his head, and looked irritably amused at his bodyguard. "The Marble City has its victory," Cimmerian corrected himself, raising an eyebrow. "They will sing songs of this battle for years to come. That force," he pointed out the window, and began speaking in a sing-song tone, "was the largest army the Sand Force in the kingdom has ever faced. Not even the legions of orcs committed those numbers to a single fight." "I'm sure they did," Faelthor grumbled, looking mildly affronted, once or twice. "But save the battle narrative for when the scribes arrived. We can speak our minds here. No politics." "So what now?" Cimmerian chuckled, his voice returned to normal. "Our knights have yet to return from the pursuit." "We'll wait for them to come back," Faelthor said. He got up and went to the door. "Bring some water for a bath," he called. "Contact the sergeants." He returned to his inside voice. "I want reports on every company. I want to know our fighting strength." Cimmerian laughed. "Fighting strength? Isn't the war over now?" "Of course not," Faelthor shook his head. "The outposts to the south still exist. Tell the army I give them leave to loot it. 2 days of pillage to take spoils. Any prisoners are to be taken alive. Only what each man can carry and no more." "Very well," Cimmerian nodded. He stepped outside to allow Faelthor's servants through the door. "Enjoy your bath." He saluted as the women began to work on his armour. "Oh, I will," Faelthor smiled. "Oh, and Cimmerian," he added. "Find out who that archer was and bring him to me." "I did tell him this would happen," Gilorn sighed to a fellow ranger. "Indeed," the ranger said in a bored voice. He always did have a mouth on him. Ireland had been bound in front of them and suspended from a wooden cross. Their sergeant and a member of the torture detachment from the 4th Legion were standing next to him at floor level. "Ranger Ireland," the sergeant shouted for everyone to hear, "is a hero of his ranger company, but he has fallen into disrepute. For talking back to his superior officer, disobeying orders, and spreading talk of desertion, he is to be whipped 30 times. May history never remember his name in pride, and may his ancestors turn away in shame." He nodded to the torturer. "Begin." The whipping was long and arduous. The torturer was taking his time between each blow, allowing each wound to fester in the cold. Finally, after an age, it was over. The sergeant nodded to Gilorn and the other ranger, who came over to untie him and lifted him up. "Was that it?" Ireland said weakly. "I thought I felt something there." "You are a fool," Gilorn shook his head. "Talk any more of this and I'll take your hand next." We should get him cleaned up, the ranger grunted. It'll be our turn to raid the camp in an hour. He was right. An hour later, they had access to the camp. They were the lowest of the pecking order in terms of acquiring loot, but the Golden King was a man who prized wealth beyond anything, and he guarded it with jealous secrecy. Many tents were still left unattended. It was too much in riches for the army alone. The remainder would go to the commanders of the army and the kingdom treasury. There were gold purses all over the camp, but most of them had been picked clean. Southern riches were derived from its immense agriculture and sea trade, allowing for mass wealth. Gilorn took the Sand People's silk. The reds and purples were favourite to his wife, and there were a small number of trinkets and tribal charms. He was aware of the value of the jewels, silver and gold, so took them too. But he was aware he would find little here to make him rich. "What do you think?" Arlen asked. He was wearing a black keffeya, a turban-like headscarf. "You look ridiculous," Gilorn said sternly. "But then again, it suits you, so I wonder what that says." "Very droll," Arlen laughed. "What about this?" He grabbed up a Saracen bow. It was relatively similar to the Scythian bows that the Rangers used, but the tips of the bow bent backwards on themselves, creating a distinct shape. "It's a good look," Gilorn nodded. "And yet, you play with trinkets and silks for your woman. Get yourself a longsword of quality or something." He picked up a curved sword and spun it in his hands. He only managed 2 swings before he dropped it. "Do you really think there's such weapons here of all places? Hurry up, the time is almost up." They returned to their camp quarter, laden down with trinkets and other treasure of varying worth. They walked through the various camps to find their own, seeing the other men of the army with much more substantial treasure about them. The warriors of Icefeld, joined with several Hors, had several gold models of war elephants and jewels from the farthest reach to the south. Others had farfully crafted weapons and clothing. As they progressed through the camp, the spoils started to dwindle, until they came to their own quarter. There was no laughter or clinking of treasure, and only a few men seemed pleased with their spoils. They crashed into their tent with sighs of relief and relaxation as their loads crashed onto the floor. "So, what plans for the great Kingslayer?" Arlen asked. "Is that what you're calling me now?" Gilorn chuckled, looking at one of the trinkets from a distance to see if it was genuine. It was not. "I once called you an idiot," Arlen smiled. "I see the world for what it is. Remind me next time you get whipped to not come to your rescue again." "Yes," Arlen snorted as he tossed a wooden coin. "You really are a hero." "I'm no hero," Gilorn sighed. "That's my problem. I'm just a hunter and a farmer." "Well," Arlen pulled himself up and opened a bottle of cheap wine. "What plans for the Kingslayer, the hunter, and farmer?" "Don't be bitter," Gilorn said. "I will simply return to the governor's farm and plough the fields for the coming harvest." "Yes," Arlen nodded, as he handed to Gilorn the bottle. "Maybe you'll dig up the Golden King in your fields. Or perhaps I shall dig up the several hundred gold that you owe me for that bet." "Ah." Arlen went very still, holding it, his hand out for the bottle. "You remember that." "That I do." The sergeant of their company suddenly entered their tent. "Ranger Gilorn," he barked, "stand up." "Huh?" Arlen raised his eyebrows. "Perhaps I don't need to pay you after all." "What's this about?" Gilorn asked. "So?" "His Honour, Captain General Faelthor, has requested your presence," the sergeant said, clearly irritated by the question. "Well, better you than me," Arlen said. "I won't miss you." Faelthor, his second-in-command, 1st Legionary General Turgon, and the other army legates were in the Saracen house, which was now being decorated with the banners of the kingdom. The artistic southern furniture had been removed, mostly to be cut up for firewood. Cameron was standing by the door with another citadel bodyguard, their spears crossed across the doorway, barring any unwanted entry. He had taken his helmet off to reveal his youthful face and pale brown hair. Despite his age, though, he stood sternly as he showed the full discipline of a hardened warrior. All of Faelthor's retinue was present as well, from his scribe to a host of 15 Hors who were attending the other legionary generals. He had now washed and changed out of his armour. Now that he had washed and changed out of his armour, he was a completely different man. His head was seemingly too small for his body, and his broad appearance of his physique had shrunk considerably. Turgon, on the other hand, was a man who looked exactly the same as he always did in any situation. His face always had a semblance of stubble, and he always wore a slight grin that implied some sort of mischief. Where Faelthor was thin, he was muscular, to an intimidating level, and his hands alternated from fists to open palms on a routine basis. They were listening to a soldier who was listing off the reports that had been entered by the company sergeant. Provincial Guard, 4th Legion, 3rd Company, 17 dead, 2 from plague, 15 from fighting, 5 under medics, 9 absent, believed fled. Fighting strength 219. Icefield Company, 4th Legion, 2nd Company, 100 dead, 15 from plague, 85 from fighting, 50 under medics, 10 absent believed fled, fighting strength 90. Ranger Militia, 4th Legion, 12th Company, 4 dead, 3 of plague, 1 from fighting, 237 under medics, 9 absent believed fled, fighting strength 0. Why is that? Turgon scowled, as he rocked the horror off his lap. 12th Company was at the rear of the lines, as far away from any fighting as anyone can get. Has the sergeant made an error? The soldier reading the notice was speechless, unable to offer an answer, and was quite distracted by the horde nearest to him, who had a cloth in her hands and was running it in between the legs of another. Double-check him and discover the true numbers of the company, Faelthor ordered. At that point, Gilorn's sergeant made his presence known. Enter. They entered the house. There were 7 of them, all of them lowly rangers, and all had black hair and beards. They all lined up next to each other, as if they were standing to be witnessed against. Gilorn stepped forward to stand next to Faelthor, and examined the rangers before them. After a moment, the bodyguard pointed to Gilorn. Him, the rest can go. Gilorn stood uncertainly, as the other rangers grumpily departed. When they were clear, the Citadel guards crossed their spears again, effectively sealing him in. Identify yourself, Turgon said, shoving the horror aside behind his chair, as if she was a plant, irritably in the way. Gilorn, son of Halon, sir, Gilorn said. Ranger Militia, 2nd Legion, 1st Company. Faelthor nodded. Ranger! Turgon shouted. Have you forgotten how to salute? Gilorn bowed his head, and thumped his fist against his chest. Sorry, sir. No excuse, sir. Be at ease, friend. Faelthor raised his hand in reassurance. You are not here to be disciplined. Turgon let out a sound of deep disappointment. He stood up. There was something underwhelming about him, now that he was out of his armour and on foot. You saved my life, he said, placing a hand on his side, and raised his own hand up. He had been nursing a cut on his lip with a handkerchief, which he vaguely held between his thumb and palm. Not once, but thrice. You not only killed 3 men of the south, but a Hashashu. Many of my best men have faced against those assassins and fallen. Upon doing that, you took up the call to slay the Golden King of the South with a single arrow. The Grace of Fortune has clearly taken you for a pet. Or a lover, Turgon interrupted, who was now sitting back down, and feeding the grapes to the whore who was now back on his lap. Faelthor sighed in annoyance, and gave a glancing glare at Turgon. The point is, I would have such a man by my side. The kingdom has more enemies than allies, and it's never a good sign. But it is time for people of great worth to be appreciated and recognized, and I cannot afford to waste good men. Sir, Gilorn shifted uncertainly. When my conscript time ends, I plan on returning home. And where is home for you? Faelthor asked, taking a step backwards. He had apparently heard this response before. South Dacia, Gilorn answered. My family works the governor's farms, and I hunt for the village. Indeed, Faelthor nodded. I will simply ask you this. How much do you earn on a ranger's wage? 200 denarii, Gilorn said, not counting my spoils taken from the battles. Spoils? Gilorn jeered. What spoils could a lowly ranger hope to acquire? Not much, sir, Gilorn admitted without shame. I do not hope for riches. I am only here because your army did I defend the woodland, and by a stretch, my home. Is that all you live for? Faelthor asked. What else is there for me? It was a rhetorical question, and men knew it. And what happens when you have a child to worry about? Gilorn asked. There was a long pause. What would you have of me, sir? Gilorn asked, taking a deep breath, choosing not to answer the question. Not out of defiance, because he simply didn't have an answer to give. Faelthor smiled in understanding. I want to induct you into my entourage. I hear you have a high standing with your peers amongst the lower ranger ranks, even among your higher level peers in the wooden cohorts. You shall be my eyes and ears for the lower ranks, and I could always use an archer with your skill by my side. I do not have any archers aside from 4 men in my bodyguard, and they aren't the best of shots. It was the truth. Archery was not a skill focused on the king's army. Only auxiliary forces like Gilorn acted as archery battalions. Gilorn was silent for a moment. What? He started, then swallowed again. What would you have me do in your entourage? You would travel with my standard, you would advise me and my fellow commanders on things to do with the lower ranges of my army. Although you will not have rank above your fellow men, you will be a man of respect to my legions. Sir, Gilorn said with confusion, I am honoured. I do not want your honour, I want your service. Do you accept? Faelthor's voice suddenly grew very businesslike. Enough of the niceties, Turgon shook his head. We have things to do, yes or no? Faelthor nodded, with a singular nod. I will not make you this offer again. Yes, Gilorn offered, responding to the pressure. Yes, sir. Good, Faelthor smiled. Now that's over with, take your place. He gestured to an empty space between his biographer and a man who kept his head bowed. "He should wash and tidy himself first," Cameron suggested. "I take men for who they are," Faelthor said slowly, trying to make his statement sound poetic. "Not the men they pretend to be. I need warriors, not men dressed in flowers." He eyed his biographer, who nodded and noted it down to pass on to the historians and chroniclers. Turgon chuckled and shook his head at the simplicity of this manipulation. He gestured to the soldier to come forth and continue his recital. "Ranger Militia, 4th Legion, 12th Company. You've already done that one." Faelthor waved his statement away. He rolled over in a bed chair and to face Gilorn. "What do you say to an entire company being removed due to injury?" "The 12th Company?" Gilorn clarified, as if he was asking to speak. Faelthor nodded, granting this permission. "It's the bows, sir." Turgon was taken aback by Gilorn's ready answer. "The bows, you say?" "Yes, sir. My cousin has a son in the 12th Company. The entire company is made of boys and men barely of age. The bows are of poor quality, and the men do not have protective armor to use them. After releasing several arrows, many of them suffer whiplash, or the bows breaking. Some were slashed across the face, others their wrists." Gilorn huffed. "I think this is already working out." He made a smug look to Turgon, who simply sat and buried his face in the horse's breast. "How would you remedy this?" "Train the remaining men in strengthening their hands and arms. Have their sergeants drill them with exercise every day instead of having them loll around without an aim in life. Bows would be harder, as the wood is prioritized for siege equipment and camp walls." Faelthor weighed this in his head, then looked up to his accountant. The sergeants are paid a day's wage regardless of the work they do. Productivity in the Legion would make savings in injury compensation, which is one of our biggest drains. The wood would be a problem. Our siege engineers are our only hope in every battle, the accountant said, in his accent heavily Greek. "Very well," Faelthor nodded. "Have it be done." "If I may, sir," Gilorn added. The topic was being stretched now, and he was pushing his newfound power. Fashioning finger guards and braces for the archers would also help as well. "Finger guards," Turgon chuckled, winking at the hall. "Yes, sir." Gilorn reached into his pack that he wore next to his sword, and pulled out a leather ring with a flat piece of leather laying across it. He placed it on his middle finger. The leather piece covered his ring and index fingers. "The leather piece takes the brunt of the bowstring. A simple piece of cloth or spent leather will do the job." "That won't be a problem," Faelthor said. "Leather is in copious supply. Spent leather more so." "Good," Turgon muttered. "Maybe we can finish this before I piss myself." They continued their reports for several hours. When it was finally finished, a messenger came for Faelthor with a scroll. He chuckled, glancing over it. "I was expecting something more historic in nature." He handed the letter to his clerk. It was his duty to read the correspondences to the commanders of the army. His Lord Steward, Ignatius II, lawful ruler of the Marble City, commander of the armies of House Steward, dictator of the kingdom, imperator of Dacia, the Sea Ward, and Equites, and keeper of the Villain Wall, hereby orders Consul Faelthor, Grand Commander of the 13 Legions of Icefeld, Governor of— "Just get to the point," Turgon interrupted. "My head is ringing like the bells of Lord Shit himself." "Notice he interrupts my titles and not the steward's," Faelthor muttered to Cameron, who chuckled. Faelthor nodded to the clerk, who bypassed the titles to proceed with the message. "Demands that you bring your army of Icefeld to the Villain for immediate disbandment, and to return to the Marble City for summary judgment upon the field of battle and an examination of your roll of office to the governorship of the province of Dacia." "I think Ignatius is starting to like you," Turgon said after a moment. "I wouldn't go that far," Faelthor grinned back. "Give the order to break camp at first light. We're going back to the Marble City. Which speech shall I use for the men?" The question was addressed to the whole room. The one about hoarding and corruption," Cameron said, the answer ready in his mind. "That should send some sparks up in the citadel." "Indeed," Faelthor agreed. "Ranger, leave us." He looked around and reconsidered. "Actually, all of you." One of the guards clapped his hands, and the hall was left for Gilorn.